Joseph and I walked through the shadowy, smelly halls of the sewer, our guide moving ahead of us excitedly. I'd started out with the leash, trying to keep a handle on the thing, as it tested the limits of my control. The constant little chuckles echoed off the wall like rat feet, and it turned its head fitfully as it took the sewers like a bloodhound. Wherever it was going, it seemed to know the way, and it wanted to get there as quickly as possible. After watching me struggle with the thing, Joseph had finally just taken the leash and seemed to have an easier time handling it. "So," I said, as the tunnel stretched out before us, "how did it all come to this? You guys living underground, I mean." "Believe it or not, it started with the farmer's market." "Really?" I asked, not sure I believed him. "Well, not really, but it really took off after the farmer's market was established. I guess it started with that weird group moving into the old McCurdy ranch. Charles McCurdy had sold 300 acres out at the edge of town, and we had all expected to see a dairy farm or maybe a turkey farm take over the old place and breathe life into the town again. Instead, we got a bunch of Amish-looking people who showed up on the first day of the farmer's market in wooden wagons like old-timey pioneers. They had jams, jellies, quilts, vegetables, even some animals. They were a big hit, though no one knew that they had such a stock of goods after being on the property for less than a month." Our shackled guide sniffed left and right as we came to another divide and took another right. "When did they start to change?" I asked, knowing there would be a change a-comin'. "It didn't take long. I worked with the emergency service line, and in Tyler, I dispatched fire, police, and medical. We started getting calls about weird people walking through people's yards at night, strange break-ins that resulted in calls back later telling us that it had been nothing, reports of strange chanting, just weird stuff that had never been a problem in Tyler before then. The people they reported, individuals in homespun dresses and suspenders, sounded a lot like the people who had came to every opening of the farmer's market, and the police started wondering if the new residents of the farm had ulterior motives. Maybe they were religious nuts bent on recruiting. Maybe they were just interested in taking people and forcing them to accept their weird religion. Maybe the people just didn't want them around, and this was their way of getting rid of them. Whatever the case, the reports started coming in less and less, but the ones that did come in were just disturbing. People would go missing when they went to investigate. The people who had called in just the day before to report strangers on their property were suddenly manning the stalls at the farmer's market, selling jams and jellies and quilts. They had changed, been indoctrinated, and nothing could bring them back." He stopped talking as our guide sped up, getting down to run on all fours as it made its way towards the end of the tunnel. It took no notice of the filth that was running through, and I winced as its hands came down in something dark and soft. It was too filthy, the two of us running along behind it as it took the corners seemingly at random. When it turned left, I was left squinting at the emergency lights at the end of the tunnel. I knew we were getting close to escaping the cramped, smelly underground then. We came out of a large, ridged tube that was leaking water into a dirty culvert. The ditch stretched into a shaggy grassland, the timothy grass swaying in the phantom breeze, and I could see the sun making its slow trek towards the bottom of the horizon. It was about 3, I figured, and we had some daylight ahead of us. Fortunately, the tube wasn't very high off the ground, because the chained thing jumped into the muddy ditch, and Joseph and I were forced to go after it. We both plunged into knee-deep mud as we made our way through the ditch, and I asked how that led to them living like the Morlocks. "Well, at first, we were staying in the hospital. Dr. Margot had sort of taken charge of the people in the hospital who hadn't changed, and we were hunkered down as the town transformed." The people who had been indoctrinated had gone to the farm, a farm that was no longer exactly where it should be, but now they were coming back to take the town, and those left behind. We had locked all our doors. The Bright followers were too weak to break through. But one night, we had something different try to get in. We saw flashing lights and realized there were cop cars parked by the ER door. James and 2 other officers were out there, and they begged us to let them in before the Bright followers could get them. After some discussion, Margot let them in, and she asked where the rest of the police department was. Turned out, James and these 2 officers were all that was left of the sheriff's department. They'd gone with Sheriff Wheeler, the old sheriff, to the Bright compound, wanting to rescue the people they had taken. They'd gone in with 15. Jacob and the other 2 were the only ones left. They had taken over the town, and Jacob said they were making their way to the hospital in force. It was okay, though, because he had a plan that would see all of us put somewhere safe. We came out of the ditch into the overgrown area between the farmlands. It was all fences and croplands as far as I could see, and Jacob kept looking around like the farm we were looking for would just appear. The thing on the leash was having the time of its life, plowing into the tall grass like a shark on the prowl for fish. It was taking us towards the outskirts, heading unerringly east as we headed for God knew what. He took Margot into the basement and showed her the sewer entrance. All the older buildings had one, maintenance hatches that helped with upkeep on the ancient sewer tunnels beneath Tyler, and it just so happened that he had the key. It's impossible to get into the tunnels without the key, he told her, so once we go down, we should be safe. There weren't a lot of us, maybe 40 or 50 people, and we stripped a lot of stuff from the hospital before disappearing into the sewers. It's been a couple of years since then, and though we lost a lot of people to the Bright, we endure. We were wading through the grass, and I expected that any minute now, one of us would come down on a snake or a hornet's nest, and we'd be really screwed. Whatever the smiling thing was, however, it didn't seem to have any fear. It was heading straight for something, and I had a feeling it knew right where the farm was. But how much longer can you hold out? I asked, dodging around brambles as we jogged through the unkempt field. Why not leave and get help, or why not leave for good? Jacob shrugged. Joseph only shrugged. Where would we go? Most of us don't have any money that's not wrapped up in the bank we can't go to. Our homes are here. Most of us can't just pick up and leave. We just stay and hope that things will change. It's all we can do, he said, sounding less than hopeful. I hated that, the hopelessness that lingered in Joseph's voice. It was pretty clear that he didn't think they would ever get the town back, and here I was using them to find Bright Farms so I could meet someone who just wanted another warm body for her church. As we walked through the field, I thought about letting this creature go and just telling Joseph to go home. What right did I have to use him for my own personal gains? In a way, I was just as selfish as the members of the church. Maybe I was right to seek them out. Kind calls to kind, after all. The sun had begun to dip, sunset on the horizon, when we crested a hill and saw it. It was just as it had been in the intro to the show, and my breath hitched in my throat as I looked down upon it. There was the general store, the white roof standing out amongst the other, more uniform buildings. There were a lot of tall, dark buildings behind it, the Wonder Barn, long and thin, like a cigar on its side, and the church as it sat with the woods at its back. The farm was surrounded by cropland and pasture, the whole thing ringed in by oaks and pines that looked like they'd been here for ages. The whole thing sat crouched like a sleeping cat, looking benign and inviting before the claws came out. When Joseph put the chain in my hand, I looked at him in confusion. What? Aren't you coming with me? Not a chance. I brought you here. We found the place, but There isn't enough money in the state to make me go into that place with you." He was making his way back the way he'd come, and I couldn't help but feel a little miffed as he abandoned me. "You're just gonna let me go in by myself to face God only knows what?" He shrugged. "It's what you wanted, right? I just agreed to help you find the place." I had just reflected that at least I had the whatever it was to keep me company, when I was suddenly jerked forward and fell headfirst into the prickly shafts of that thick timothy grass. My guide went charging into the tall grass, rushing down into the valley like an arrow fired from a bow. I tried to get up and give chase, but even as I ran after it, I knew I'd never catch him. He was on all fours, running flat out for the woods around the farm, and I was barely keeping him in sight. As the sun sank lower and night became more than an idea, I realized the futility of it and stopped to catch my breath. I didn't need him anyway. I knew where I was going, and I was closer than I had ever been. The sun had still been up as I stood at the top of the hill, but within the trees that surrounded the farm, it was the soupy dusk that comes before night. Everything seemed to shimmer, the shadows making the forest seem like a mirage. The air seemed too thick, too substantial, and I almost expected to bump into something as I came through the forest. It was like invisible things hunted me on the edge of my vision, and I had to stifle a shriek when a twig snapped not far from me. I wanted to bolt, to run through the woods like Snow White, but I needed to keep my head. The trees hadn't looked so numerous, and I knew I'd come out of them any minute. They ended as abruptly as they had begun, and I got low as I came to the edge of the road that led to the general store. I could see there in the distance the white roof at odds with the black wooden structures, and I breathed in an excited, terrified breath. I was here. I'd arrived. I'd come to Bright Farm. I wanted to run up to the building, to throw the door open and find my mother behind the counter, smiling in expectation. She would greet me, she would embrace me, and through some kind of hidden magic, I would convince her to come with me. She would leave the farm, we'd go back home, where we would live happily ever after, as a family. It was a happy daydream, but I still kept low and quiet as I approached, knowing that if anyone but my mom, and maybe Brother Thomas, saw me, then it would be very bad for me. I snuck up the road, not encountering anyone, and that seemed odd. The lights were out in the general store, and all the houses were dark and seemed uninhabited. Surely they didn't turn in this early, I thought. The sun wasn't even down all the way. And when I found the general store locked, I nearly cried out in despair. I'd come so far, I'd risked so much, and now they were gone. I didn't know where they were, but at that moment I was afraid they had simply picked up stakes and moved on. I was sitting on one of the rockers on the front porch when something made me squint and turn to look out into the field. There, coming from the doors of the chapel, was a bright line of light that seemed to be escaping through the crack in the center of the double doors. It was the only light to be seen, and despite the chapel being nearly a mile away, I could see it clear as sunrise. The windows were lit as well, though their light looked a little more muted than this all-intrusive bright emanation. Before I knew it, I was walking towards the chapel, my feet knowing the way, even if my brain hadn't caught up. I was stepping off the porch when the door opened, and I was left looking at a familiar form lifting a lantern towards me. "Angel, right on time," Brother Thomas said. "If you'd come with me, we'll get you to your mother." You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.